when it comes to climate change, winning slowly is the same thing as losing. Those were the words of Bill McKibben, and we know right now we're facing an extreme challenge, and one that's going to demand that we have low carbon fuels and carbon neutral fuels here going forward. And today I'm really excited to engage in a conversation with Allison Book, who is the Energy Transition Officer, Director of Energy Transition, I believe.
It's close enough, actually.
Close.
I make
Vice
a
President.
new title regularly,
Okay.
just to keep it feisty.
Because the space is moving so quickly.
I know. I mean, standards evolve. Why can't titles? So
we're going to look to you today for some of the insights on the energy transition. And my first one is exactly on that. It's on the speed and the pace and your relative optimism around, or pessimism around, whether we're moving fast enough. Certainly, 2 months ago, we had the world's leading scientists report to us that we're not on track, and it's going to take heroic efforts to get on track. But at the same time, we at RMI look at the situation now, and yes, there are geopolitics at play. We see technology breakthroughs. We see really unfettered commitments from corporates to move forward. Baker Hughes among them, right, with climate alignment ambitions. Is that enough? Where do we stand right now in the energy transition? Are you optimistic or pessimistic on our ability to close the gap here? So just a light question to lead us.
A light question here. So that this is something that comes up a lot, and I'd say it varies from day to day, but in my core, I believe that the core of any kind of a transition is fueled by people. And we forget about that, but you heard it in the last panel, the role of the people part of the equation for sustainability. And so if you know that people can rise to a really what seems to be an insurmountable challenge, that's when society has done its greatest innovative sort of technology leaps and things like that. So from that perspective, I remain cautiously optimistic. But I would like to say that NOAA just came out with their climate data from May. Did you guys see that? So if you saw that, you should be alarmed and somewhat pessimistic, because what came out of that report on Friday was that it was 421 parts per million. The last time we had that level was back in the Pliocene about 4 million years ago, and that was when there were largely no ice caps, right? Does that cause alarm? Yeah, in terms of inundation to areas that are low-lying, et cetera. But if we're already at that pace and we haven't quite yet lost the ice caps, there is hope, right? And so we should always think about what can we do today to really bring the energy transition forward. So I go back to my optimism and saying it's never a bad time to do the right thing. And I think there's a lot that can be done in that where technology meets policy and meets moxie and the will of people to actually accelerate the transition.
Yeah, and that kind of will is something that Baker Hughes has demonstrated, and you've made commitments internally. I'd love to just get a sense, to achieve climate alignment here, right? We know we need to do two things. One, we need to get to net zero by 2050. And two, we need to have our emissions in this decade, by the end of this decade. And I'm just wondering how it's going for you, right? How is Baker Hughes responding to that internal, kind of commitment there? Tell us a little bit about your progress so far.
Yeah, so our internal commitment, we made that a couple of years ago, and we always are proud to say that we were one of the first people to come and rise to the occasion when the challenge was laid down. I wouldn't say that it's always a smooth transition even in companies, so it takes time to get to where you need to go. And one of the first parts of that journey was really taking a step back and saying, do we know the magnitude of our own emissions today? And then what is it in the hands of our customers? And there's a lot of debate right now sitting around like that scope 1 and 2 versus scope 3, and we bandy these words around a lot, and I think a lot of people don't even really know what the impacts are. And so we've spent quite a bit of time making sure that we understood the challenge that's in front of us, building out the roadmap. But today, where we're at today is we're a couple weeks from publishing our latest results. And so I don't want to give it away because I really can't yet. So we'll build
even a sneak peek?
Even a sneak peek. We're on trend to do good things towards getting to net zero. I will say that. And so where we're at today, and I feel that, I know that we are really just ramping up in our company. We just, getting back to the opening concept of people, if you don't have an engaged public, it's not the burden of companies, it's the burden of society, right? This is a societal problem. So if a company commits to doing something, they've got to engage all the people in an organization to get it done. And so one of the key pieces that we've worked on internally, and so while you hear us talk a lot about the technological suite that we're going to bring in terms of CCS and hydrogen and methane detection, behind that all, our people are empowered to literally take the carbon dioxide equivalent, but we say take the carbon out of our operations and up through our value chain. And so we did a quiet launch of an employee engagement program last year, and we laid the groundwork quietly behind the scenes for our employees. And on Earth Day, we launched a campaign called Carbon Out, and the tagline, and it'll be my call to action at the end, is are we all in to take carbon out? And so we have not seen this level of employee engagement for most of our programs, and we've had a huge tractive base of people who have targeted and identified areas that we can be more efficient, we can replace lights, we can think about our HVAC, even more ambitious projects like carbon capture and storage. Let's do it at this site. And so that's going to take us a little more time to get a project like that going. But the collective will of our people at Baker Hughes is why I'm optimistic.
And so you mentioned this scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, and certainly Baker Hughes is known for being, kind of a technology provider and an operations partner to many of the biggest oil and gas companies in the world. How does your commitment, how has that changed the way that you interface with others, right? And what solutions are you pushing forward right now into the market and acting differently because of that internal commitment you've made?
Well, so I would say at the core of who we are, I think we're best, people often talk about us as a traditional oil field services company, but we have a lot more in our toolkit than that. And actually, if you've heard us talking more recently, we have our OFSE side, and then we have an industrial energy technology half. But the two halves do make a whole. And when you put that all together, we interact with our core customer base like we always have in the oil and gas sector. And so when you look at it from that perspective, we're doing a lot on detection and monitoring of methane leakage, because that is what's here today. You can't even really get to the end game until you stop the leaky system that happens in various parts of the world right now. And so there's traction for that. There's policy that supports that kind of work, and so we have that going. But then you think about the sort of mid and long term, where we're going to have to go is much heavier, what I would say is getting to net zero abatement solutions. I don't necessarily want to say the word decarbonize here, but making sure that you have projects that can get an energy system to a net zero state. So for an instance, one of the things that we're interacting with customers on is the real collaborative role in taking something that could be an earlier technical readiness level kind of concept to fruition and scale up. And so one of the things, it's not an early TRL, it's a turbine that we have that's been conventionally looked at as natural gas. It's switching that over and getting to 100% hydrogen-powered turbine. Same concept, different application, right? And so how we're interacting is a little bit more, tell us what your problem is, and then we're going to come back with a solution. So I bet you're wondering, is she going to answer the question? Okay, so all in, we come in and we, just the same way we've always done, we think about the solution set, but now it's different. The problem is a little bit different, but are all of our customers, our conventional customers, in the same place? No. And so we'll be along through collaborative partnerships every step of the way as they're ready, as we start to go further afield and have different partnerships. You can't get to net zero as a society without working together, and it really starts at the most fundamental building block of energy production.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned there some of the opportunities around technology, but there's also the cost that's incurred to your customers in order to adopt that technology. That can't all be borne by the private sector in the end. And I'm wondering, as you think about the policy environment that you operate in, what are the changes that need to be made that can support faster deployment of these emerging technologies?
Yeah, this is something we think about a lot. Part of my team is I think of it as my team has we're called the energy transition team, but that's pretty vague, like what's behind that? And we do everything from the emissions accounting and then developing the strategy behind abatement and then thinking about that nexus with our products. But one part is policy and funding for that very reason. And so on the policy and funding side, we first start with the approach of help us scale up, right? Because if you've just got only early TRL, it's not going to make it through the valley of death without some support. And so there's that piece. But at the same time, you have to concurrently tackle the policy challenges around infrastructure, which we chatted about briefly. There's infrastructure challenges to any sort of a big solution set that's like a big industrial system, because you got infrastructure that's coming into play. And so a lot of that tech has to go hand in hand with incentivizing it on the front end of the R&D piece to help prop that up, the development, but then creating markets with a policy backstop in a way. And so there's punitive, which we would say, let's not go down that road, but let's look at agnostic policy that doesn't pick a winner or a loser, but that allows the most competitive sort of energy system to survive. And in that end, then over time, the market will bear out, right? And we should have a pretty dynamic and competitive energy mix so that it's not all betting on one thing. Right? When we go down the policy landscape on energy, there's always these very sort of siloed tracks that you hear different parts of the sector arguing for their specific things. But really, we've got to always maintain a robust energy mix for energy security reasons that I think are all too apparent today.
If you had the magic wand to wave on the policy side and say one specific policy that could level the playing field or create that diverse portfolio, is there something that you would point to that particularly would be a big unlock for the system?
This is something I think about because that answer changes from day to day. So some days I get fired up about if there was parity among all different types of energy so that you could go from zero to the onset of turning an energy system on, that right there alone is like a levelizer. You would see a lot more development in different areas if it was easier to turn projects on without sacrificing environmental costs and things like that. And so that's one of my standards is like, let's make it easier so that for the parts of the world where we still see pretty severe energy poverty that's also disadvantaged from a sort of carbon sense, right, where let's say coal is favored or something like that, or let's go even more basic in parts of the world where they could still use animal dung or pellet stoves and the most fundamental part of energy. Let's level that so it makes it easier for projects to come in these areas that helps levelize cost and make it easier to come in, because the upfront development time does really disadvantage certain parts of the energy system. But then, I'd also like to be king for a day and give out a lot more R&D money, okay? So there's that. I think that does help a lot in terms of fostering innovation.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to be successful here, it's going to be $3 to $5 trillion a year, every year for the next 30 years that we need to invest in this next energy economy. And it can be a great equity equalizer here globally as we think about opportunity, as we think about the new world, the new infrastructure that we have to build in the process.
It's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. It's a lot of investment. And that their private capital is going to have to come in at scale here as well. So any bankers in the audience, I'm sure your ears are perked up. I do want to turn to the audience here and just see if I'd love to keep engaging in the conversation here, but I'm sure you all would like to as well. Any questions here for Allison from the audience? Yes.
Hi, this is Leonardo from Deutsche Bank, but it's not related to funding or banking. How do you balance when you analyze the steps that you want to take into your journey with maybe other business opportunities that are appearing in the more traditional fossil fuels area of the business, because at the end you want to make this journey, but there are also very important opportunities, especially now with the oil prices being so high in the more traditional business.
Yeah, I mean, if you start with the higher oil prices, and full disclosure, I'm not an oil and gas economist, but what I will reflect on here is that if you take that out and you just think about the energy transition itself, how we're valuing the projects from the get-go is companies today, one thing that we've learned when prices go high and prices go low is when you create the boom and bust cycle in more conventional energy sources, it puts tension on things like just transition, right? And so let's try to eliminate the boom and bust a little bit more, right, for starters. The piece of this, though, as we get into the energy transition, you've got to place bets, all right? So you've got to mind your core shop and think about how do you protect the margins of your profit margins for investors. But as investors have changed a little bit, because not all investors are there yet on sustainable investment, right? But for those who are really pushing on those levers more and more, they still want to see strong profit margin and return for their investment, but now they also want the premium on how do we deliver this in a more sustainable way, right? And so in thinking about where we're going to go for customers, knowing that they're getting some of the same pressure, it really creates the opportunity for us to place bets on a series of different kinds of technology while we still mind our core business. And so I'd give you an example. We recently have an acquisition with a direct air capture company called Mosaic, and that's early technical readiness, but with direct air capture, anybody who figures out how to take the price point down for that, they win in the energy transition, right? So any bet that you're going to place on a fairly long-term play like that, you come in early, you get to invest a little, and you might have big returns, or maybe it's only a little loss if it doesn't work out. But we evaluate those based on future outcomes that we know we want to drive in the energy transition. The other part is more and more companies like ours are looking at carbon pricing internal to really see does this kind of a floor or a ceiling make it the kind of project that we want to invest in? Does it make financial sense? So there's a lot of different ways of looking at it. But at Baker Hughes, we're placing some really great strategic bets on CCS, hydrogen, geothermal, methane detection. We have another group on integrated power solutions. And so right now, it's a fun, I think it's a little bit fun, actually, to see where we go in the next few years with all of our investments.
Yeah, just that direct air capture. The most recent IPCC reports, 10 gigatons is what we need by 2050, which is 1,000 global scale chemical plants, equivalent of capital that would need to be deployed. So we need these solutions at scale, and we need them at low cost, right?
Right.
Right now, we're talking $600 a ton, right? So this is where Baker Hughes and others need to innovate, but we need to engage the entrepreneurial community and the scientific community as well. Let me see, is there one more question from the audience here? Yes, up in the front row. Just wait one moment here, please.
Hi, I'm Jay Madigan. I run a nonprofit that is water-driven, and I also do advisory work with water utilities, and I'm from Florida. So water reuse is going to be in high demand, and it requires energy, and a lot of energy. And I'm in over my head with an energy discussion, but if you could address that nexus between water and energy and your prospects, your vision, and I really like that word competitiveness. Is there competitiveness in energy's drive to make water accessible, available, more plentiful, especially through reuse? Thank you.
That's an excellent question. This is something that before I came to Baker Hughes, I spent a fair bit of time working on the energy-water nexus, actually. And if I take my hat off, and then I'm going to put it back on at the end for the answer, taking Baker Hughes out for a moment, the next frontier for geoscience, so in my last role, I ran a geoscientific nonprofit. And a big part of what we were thinking about was what does the future look like from a water accessibility and cleanliness? The water quality is of the utmost importance. And when you look at the future of geoscientists that have worked in energy for a long period of time, the natural progression is the next kind of prospector we would expect to see are water prospectors. actually. But there's only so much that you can pull out of the shallow aquifer system and the deep groundwater. I should tell you guys, I am a geologist. And so I answer that with that hat on. So the reuse part, there's a lot of investment going in there right now. Right now, as Baker Hughes, we at some points in our history have been very engaged with water, particularly as it comes out of the energy use from like a well site. We're not currently as engaged there, except for on our philanthropic side, where we're really looking at access to water projects, where there's a nexus to geoscience. So if you're interested, that program's called Geoscientists Without Borders, run by the Society of Exploration Geophysicists, and it is a wonderful nonprofit that connects people to primary water sources. Now, does that get at reuse? No, that's the next frontier, and a lot more investment's gonna have to come in. So I'd love to talk with you about that afterwards as an aside. Yeah.
Wonderful. There was one more hand in the back. I think we can go there, and then we'll close it out. Oops, sorry.
She's getting her steps in. And so are we walking around the building, right? This is a big facility.
Thank you, Alison, for the great insight. I was more looking towards the statement when you made the whole organization, people are rallying towards this larger vision to your internal survey. Now, how do you think the next steps would be for you in terms of, let's say, just take the buildings that you own, right? That would be around 30% of carbon footprint, if not more, right? How do you take the next steps to reduce that? And is there a gamification involved to change the human behavior to drive that goal?
So we have talked about behind the scenes on gamification. We're not quite there yet. Right now, a lot of it is, so you've got to think about where we want to head. I'm going to back this up just a little bit, and then I'm going to answer your question very directly. When you think about the world trying to get to net zero, you can't get there if the world's not more sustainable. So you have to start to really introduce the notion of what sustainability is. And a lot of times people focus on it only being about natural resource use and doing that sustainably. But really at the core, if you want people's behavior to change, you have to treat your contract with employees in a company or in any organization as a part of the sustainability dimension. It's, are we creating workplaces that are inclusive, that are open to new ideas, and actually being innovative, not just saying that they are, but fostering innovation, that there is no such thing as a silly idea, or, you know what I mean? That you're building an ecosystem that supports people sustainably, okay, and how they work, right? And then once you start to think about the people at the core, that's why I always start out in that place, and think that they're operating transparently, principled, and governed, then you start to come back around and they make better environmentally sustainable choices, right? And so as we're doing this, we started behind the scenes with a smaller group of people to get infrastructure ready, but we started in buildings, okay? We first started looking across our building fleet to look at what can we do on power. Power is the first lever you can pull. We identified 8 levers within the company that 4 sit on the sort of operational control side, and then the other 4 really are the whole value chain when you look at scope 3 up and downstream. And so while we're always going to focus on buildings, we're also balancing that against the risk of climate change impacting facilities. So the choices that we make and how we spend that money, those 2 things converge so that we get a lot more bang for our buck. So it's not just about reducing the emissions and saving electricity or how we transform our fleet, that's another one of the levers, is that we're also thinking, can we also mitigate against the eventuality that climate is gonna keep changing? Why? Because the Earth is a dynamic system, okay? And so we've gotta make sure that we always buffer against risk as we operate with employees working in those facilities. And then we can have environments that treat them well, that treat the environment well, and are a lot more sustainable and economically more efficient in how you run them. But yeah, the buildings have been from the very onset. So people suggest building projects. They think about biodiversity. They think about, well, there's a big range of topics that have come up through that program. It's been really cool to see how imaginative, creative, and innovative people are, and also practical. That's cool too, because that usually means they're thinking about how much it costs while we're doing it.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Allison, for
Thank
sharing
you.
your insights today. You know, on this theme of people, I'm always reminded of the Margaret Mead quote, "Never doubt that a small and committed group of citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." Clearly, you're among those. We're all among those. Thank you for joining us here this afternoon. We will reconvene starting at 4:45, either in this room, the Horizon Room, if you want to continue on the policy and partnerships track, or in Atrium Hall A, if you'd like to continue on the Chief Sustainability Officer track. So thank you all. It's time for a break.
Thanks for having us.